Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Balavad Giridhari Gopi Jana Balavad Giridhari Jasodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jasodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Balavad Giridhari Gopi Jana Balavad Giridhari Jasodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jasodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ramo Rama Ramo Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ramo 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ramo Ram Ramo Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ramo, Hare Ramo, Ram Ramo, Hare Hare. Srimad, His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Glorious to the assembled devotees. Glorious to the assembled devotees. Glorious to the assembled devotees. Glorious to Sri Guru and Govardhana. Excuse me for one second, I just need to grab my glasses. Sorry? Oh, are they? How did they get there? Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Chapter 21, verse 56. This is the long one. Yeah, it is, but something goes up to chapter 6. Maybe part 2. So we're doing 2 verses today because one of the verses Bhagavad was going to cover on limits today. But to get us all in the mood, she did a verse on Chaitanya Leela instead. So I'm going to read her verse and then we'll chant together the next verse, which is the one on the board. Adamascha samhedhite lulape vyanakshore nribhihi shayane tvai lokayam dakshugrashto vinakashyati. Translation. If you gave up all thought of the world's situation, unrighteousness would flourish. For men would hanker only after money. For men who hanker only after money would be unopposed. Such miscreants would attack and the world would perish. So this is Kadama Muni talking to Swayambhuva Manu. He's glorifying the activities of the Manu, the king. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Because the scientific division of 4 varnas and 4 ashrams is now being extinguished, the entire world is being governed by unwanted men who have no training in religion, politics or social order. And it is in a very deplorable condition. In the institution of 4 varnas and 4 ashrams, there are regular training principles for the different classes of men. Just as in the modern age there's a necessity for engineers, medical practitioners and electricians, and they are properly trained in different scientific institutions, similarly, in former times, the higher social orders, namely the intelligent class, the Brahmins, the ruling class, the Kshatriyas, and the mercantile class, the Vaishyas, were properly trained. Bhagavad Gita describes the duties of the Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas and Sudras. When there is no such training, one simply claims that because he is born in a Brahmin or Kshatriya family, he is therefore a Brahmin or a Kshatriya, even though he performs the duties of a Sudra. Such undue claims to being a higher caste man make the system of scientific social orders into a caste system, completely degrading the original system. Thus society is now in chaos, and there is neither peace nor prosperity. It is clearly stated herein that unless there is the vigilance of a strong king, impious, unqualified men will claim a certain status in society and will make the social order perish. So we do text 56. Atapi priyachche tvam vira. Atapi prichche tvam vira. Jadatam tvam ihagata. Jadatam tvam ihagata. Tadvayam nivyalekena. Tadvayam nivyalekena. Pradipadyamahe hrida. Pradipadyamahe hrida. Atapi prichche tvam vira. Jadatam tvam ihagataha. Tadvayam nivyalekena. Pradipadyamahe hrida. Atapi prichche tvam vira. Jadatam tvam ihagataha. Tadvayam nivyalekena. Pratipadyamahe vridha. Atapi prichche tvam vrira. Jadatam tvam ihagataha. Tadvayam nivyalekena. Pratipadyamahe hrida. Vaishnavi? Someone wants to do it? Atapi, in spite of all this, Prichje, I ask, Tvam, you, Vira, O valiant king, Yatatam, for the purpose, Tvam, you, Iha, here, Agataha, come, Tat, that, Vayam, we, Nivyalekena, without reservation, Pratipadyamahe, we shall carry out, Hrida, with heart and soul. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. In spite of all this, I ask you, O valiant king, the purpose for which you have come here. Whatever it may be, we shall carry it out without reservation. Purport. When a guest comes to a friend's house, it is understood that there is some special purpose. Kadama Muni could understand that such a great king as Swayambhuva, although travelling to inspect the condition of his kingdom, must have had some special purpose to come to his hermitage. Thus he prepared himself to fulfill the king's desire. Formerly it was customary that the kings used to go to the kings and it was customary that the sages used to go to the kings and the kings used to visit the sages in their hermitages. Each was glad to fulfill the other's purpose. This reciprocal relationship is called Bhakti Karya. There is a nice verse describing the relationship of mutual beneficial interest between the Brahmin and the Kshatriya. Kshatram Dvijatvam. Kshatram means the royal order, and Dvijatam means the Brahminical order. The two were meant for mutual interest. The royal order would give protection to the Brahmins for the cultivation of spiritual advancement in society, and the Brahmins would give their valuable instruction to the royal order on how the state and the citizens can gradually be elevated in spiritual perfection. As in the Bhaktivedanta purports of the third canto, 21st chapter, entitled Conversation Between Manu and Kadama. Amaganatimanandasya ganananjana shalakaya chakshurunmilitam jena tajmai shri gurave namaha Anchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhuvayevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. So, Kadama Muni has been addressing Swayambhuva. This is the last verse, but before this, Kadama has been glorifying the qualities of Swayambhuva Manu, who is the king. So I was thinking, when I read this verse, in spite of all this, he's saying, in spite of all these reasons, like the tour that you have undertaken, he said, is surely intended to protect the virtuous and kill the demons. So he's listing the reasons why the king might be on pilgrimage, so to speak, or why he's visiting. He says, if you gave up all thought of the world's situation, unrighteousness would flourish. The men who hanker only after money would be unopposed. Such miscreants would attack, the world would perish. And he's saying, in spite of all these things, the purpose for which you have come here, whatever it may be, we shall carry it out without reservation. So I was thinking, the Bhagavatam lessons always contain a lesson for us. The verses always contain a lesson. On one hand, we have a Manu visiting a saintly person in the form of Kadama Muni. He's a renunciant. He's been living in his hermitage. But I was thinking that the thing that struck me was the relationship between the two of them. There's this really loving relationship that goes on. And that will, in the next chapter, after Maitreya has been glorifying the king Manu, then Manu starts to glorify the qualities of the Brahmins. So we have two very different personalities greeting each other. Swayambhuva has arrived on a golden chariot. He's got a whole army at his disposal. He rules the planet. Kadama Muni, on the other hand, is sitting there meditating, offering sacrifices to Vishnu, it's described. His clothes are described as being ragged. His hair is matted. But somehow or other, these two personalities, they're not greeting one another based on the material situation that the other is in. There's an internal relationship that they're feeling. The king is not looking down on Kadama's material position. The king would probably be the most opulent person on the planet. So he's not looking down on this person who's in front of him, who's in rags. And Kadama Muni is regarding the king respectfully, not because he's a king, but because of his wonderful qualities. Not all kings have these qualities, as we know. But Swayambhuva Manu is glorified because of his qualities. They're full of respect for each other's character and their adherence to spiritual values. They're taking pleasure in each other's association and appreciating the differences in the way they serve. So this appreciation leads to a loving exchange. But Kadama Muni is not just any renunciate. He's very special. Otherwise, why would the king have bothered to seek him out? What is this special quality that Kadama had? The Bhagavatam describes in an earlier verse that actually Krishna, the Supreme Lord in the form of Vishnu, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, being pleased, showed himself to Kadama Muni and displayed his transcendental form. As Srila Prabhupada says in the purport, he actually saw the eternal, blissful, transcendental form of the Lord. Adorned with crown and earrings, he held his characteristic conch, his disc and mace in his three of his hands, and a white lily in his fourth hand. He glanced about in a happy, smiling mood, whose sight captivates the hearts of all the devotees. A golden streak on his chest, a fabulous Kaustuba gem suspended from his neck, he stood in the air with his lotus feet placed on the shoulders of Garuda. So Krishna has actually appeared to Kadama in his meditation. I was thinking, this is not an ordinary thing. I don't know about you, Prabhus, but when I was chanting my rounds this morning, Krishna didn't appear to me in his transcendental form standing on Garuda. He was there in his form of his name, undoubtedly. But it's something special that the Supreme Lord will physically appear right in front of you. So this is the level of elevation of Kadama Muni. Kadama offers his obeisances to the king, it's described earlier. And Prabhupada points out that as a qualified Brahmin, it's not that he's obliged to. But Swayambhuva Manu is not just a king. He's celebrated because of his good character, his righteous acts. Kadama begins by praising the king's duties of upholding Dharma, protecting the social order, and Kadama appreciates the potency that the king must have to be able to rule the planet. He was considered saintly, one of the Raja Rishis. Srila Prabhupada quotes a verse in today's purport, Shatram Dvijatam Chaparash Paratam. So he translates in the purport, Shatram means the Kshatriyas, Dvijatam is the Brahmins, and the word Parashtaram means mutual help, Parashparatam. The Brahmins would give advice to the Kshatriyas, the rulers, the government, and the government, which means the Kshatriya class, according to that good advice, would then rule the state very nicely. Everyone would be peaceful. Actually, Kadama Muni, even though he's asking here, what could be the purpose for your visit, he actually knows why Swayambhuva Manu has come. Because Krishna has appeared to him and said to him earlier, in 2 days' time, dear Kadama Muni, Swayambhuva Manu will arrive here with his daughter. Because Kadama, in his heart, has been wishing to get married. So then he asks the king, how can I serve you? So we see that etiquette. I was thinking of that phrase, devoid of all sense of false prestige. That is Kadama's attitude. Srila Prabhupada comments in a class on the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 1, verse 28, he says, actually before that I'll read, this affectionate relationship between them is based on admiring their internal qualities, their character. It's not based on whether they happen to belong to the same family or some sort of in-group. You know, these people are my friends, these are my enemies. It's not like that. Prabhupada said, as long as this conception of life exists, that I am the body, and anyone who's related with this body, well, they're my own people, my kinsfolk, my relatives. As long as I'm identifying with the body, and then if I'm seeing people like that, they're somehow connected with my body, they please me in some way or another, someone else doesn't. He says this conception of life is the greatest barrier for advancing in spiritual consciousness. He puts a pretty serious qualification on that. Therefore, the Vedic civilization is planned, Prabhupada said, that one has to give up this rascal own man conception. These people are sort of my people and those people are not. And I was thinking, if we think about what's happening on the planet right now, of people's lives being ruined because they're being invaded by someone else, because they're not part of my group, that if you're not part of my group, then especially if you're in the position of power and you have armies at your disposal, then you can wreak unbelievable havoc on people's lives. I was seeing some vision on the news recently where blocks of apartment blocks are just being blown up. They're not military people, they're just civilians going about their lives. But because they're out of favour with some other ruler, his army is just attacking them, blowing apart their lives. So Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita gives us the real vision, how to see others. It's this famous verse, the humble sage by virtue of true knowledge sees with equal vision a learned, gentle Brahmin, a cow, elephant, a dog eater. Dog eater means he's an outcast. He sees all of them as spirit souls. According to their karma, they're inhabiting different bodies. And they're acting according to the modes of nature that influence them. But he's seeing that spiritual essence of all of them. It's the same spirit soul, but it's powering different sorts of bodies. So this verse actually annihilates the validity of the caste system that goes on in India right now, where it doesn't matter whether you have Brahminical vision. If you're born in a Brahmin family, then you hang on to that privilege that you're given. And anyone who's not born in a Brahmin family, according to you, can never attain Brahminical status. But Krishna is not talking of that. He's saying in true knowledge, we see with equal vision. According to the actions of someone, they demonstrate their qualities. Prabhupada says that in the beginning of the Gita, Arjuna is preparing the ground how to receive the instructions of the Bhagavad Gita. We remember that Arjuna is lamenting for having to fight his kinsman. So all of this lamentation, his anxiety, is based on the bodily conception, that he's identifying with his body, and therefore some people are his relatives, some people are not, some people are friends, some people are not. So Prabhupada's saying that he's preparing the ground, his attitude, he's demonstrating for us, so that Krishna can then give his instruction. Proper instruction will begin, and the process of seeing the soul as separate from the body begins. Prabhupada comments, unless one understands that there is a soul different from the body, then there's no spiritual education. He says this is the basic principle. If you do not understand what is a soul, what is spirit soul, then where is spiritual education? I can remember when Prabhupada used to give classes, he used to remind us of that again and again. Like we hear it a million times, isn't it, that we're not these bodies. And immediately we walk out there, at least in my case, totally forget, back into the bodily concept. But Prabhupada used to sort of look at it, he'd look around at the audience and he'd look right into your eyes and he'd say, so you are not this body. And then he'd go, are you convinced? And most of us would sort of look at the floor. I'd like to be convinced. Takes some time. So Manu, the king, has made a special journey to see Kadamba Muni. As king, Manu could have, Prabhupada says, he could have actually just appointed one of his representatives. He's got whole legions of people that serve him. He could have appointed someone, go off and find a husband for my daughter. But he's taking it as so important. And he wants to visit Swayambhuva Manu. As we know, when somebody saintly comes into town to give class, we're attracted. It's so relishable to hear the class presented, like Manu Maharaj is coming tomorrow, I believe. And it's so attractive to hear from these advanced personalities. So the king has taken the opportunity to come directly to meet Kadamba Muni. And obviously, the king is, like we said, unbelievably, his position is unbelievably opulent. So he's choosing Kadamba not based on his external situation, but on his spiritual qualifications. That is, his character. It's described in a later verse, just to sort of give the full picture, that Devahuti, who is the king's daughter, she's heard about Kadamba Muni from Narad Muni. Narad's always around, isn't he? Moving around, filling in, moving things along. She's heard about the glories of Kadamba Muni from Narad Muni, and she has decided that's who she would like to marry. So it's not a one-sided story. She's not, it's not that her father has decided something against her wishes. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada mentions how the sadhus or the Brahmins would sometimes visit the rulers and vice versa, as we see here, the king coming to associate with the Brahmin, to hear from him. That's the real thing, isn't it? The king wants to hear from this sadhu. So I was thinking with today's leaders, what advice could they possibly be getting? Generally, the leaders are just surrounded by circles of what we call sycophants, people who just say yes, just glorify him. Oh yes, yes, whatever you say, it's wonderful. So basically they're blind because they have no avenue to get good advice. The different orders have different natures, different abilities. The Brahmins have their abilities. The kings, the administrative class, they've got special abilities. One cannot do the job of the other. This arrangement was created by Krishna. So even when people try to invent a system that doesn't include that, like for example when communism was sort of experimented in Russia and China, and of course the basic principle is, we're all equal on a material platform. But of course we're not. Even on the first day of communism, you had some people in charge and other people doing what they were told. I was thinking, even within our ISKCON society, we've had instances of someone who has a Brahminical nature, obviously then very intelligent, but they're not really suited to governing. So Brahmins are not supposed to be involved with violence, but Kshatriyas have to be willing to use violence if necessary. In this way there can be a peaceful condition. In today's society, it's the government who reserves the right to administer violence. Of course, it's carried out by the government with the imperfections of Kali Yuga. But still, there's a police force, there's an army. Violence is sometimes still resorted to or carried out because there's always going to be miscreants and a criminal class. So those warrior type of people, they always have to be there. Otherwise the criminal class will just multiply. Actually, it's described statistically, out of every 1,000 people, Generally, you've got one person who's a criminal. For every 1,000 people, there's going to be a criminal amongst them, or someone of criminal mentality. So the word kshatriya, shat means injury, and tra comes from the word trayate, which means saves. A kshatriya, his duty is to save the citizen from being injured by others. Unlike in today's warfare, the kshatriya would never use violence on somebody who we would call a civilian. They would only fight with another kshatriya, someone else who was qualified to fight. We see now when violence takes place, when war breaks out, who is it who suffers most? It's the citizens, isn't it? Simple people trying to go about their lives, but they're dragged into this conflict. And often the guy who's in charge, he's way back behind the lines in a bunker. He's in the safest place. But you've got women and children being blown apart. The citizens suffer most. I was thinking, imagine a situation if our current leaders were visited by saintly people who they trusted. Like, for example, Modi, President Modi in India. He has close relationships with several devotees, apparently. That situation, it would completely change how the rulers were acting. If there were saintly, Brahminical people able to talk to these rulers, give them a slightly broader picture. These verses that we're reading today were spoken in the Satya Yuga. So we're talking millions of years ago. It was a different time. But the principles that the Bhagavatam exposes are still relevant. I was thinking of that verse from yesterday, that if the king gave up all thought of the world situation, unrighteousness would flourish, and men who hanker only after money would be unopposed. Such miscreants would attack, the world would perish. So we can see in today's situation, so many interests whose only interest is money. Today's society is actually more or less ruled indirectly by commercial interests. Big companies, private enterprises, they have vast resources at their disposal. Some, I think it's just, who is it, IBM, someone like that, their market their value on the stock market is about the equal of Australia's wealth. One company can have so much wealth at their disposal. And so they have armies of people lobbying for their interests. The first example I've ever heard of a private company that started off as a small commercial enterprise was the East India Company, a British company who went to India first as just a trading company. Have you all heard of that, the East India Company? Anyone heard of them? So they were just a trading company. They went to India. But gradually they expanded, and they would use Indians from different parts of the company to be sort of soldiers to support their interests in another part. So it eventuated that this East India Company had practically the biggest standing army in the world to support their commercial interests, bigger than any army that existed in Europe. This private commercial company by the British who decided they went to India to begin with just for commercial interests, but nothing was going to get in their way. So they had this huge army. Anyone tried to stop them? They had like forts, huge cannons, the whole thing. Eventually, the British government, after I think nearly a century of this going on, they became a little embarrassed. They became a lot embarrassed that the things that this company were doing were so horrendous that the government was forced to sort of shut them down finally. But by then, Britain had sort of taken over India. So on these big companies, even now, there are few ethical or moral requirements put on them. unless they get caught out being blatantly dishonest, and the reason that they get caught out is because that embarrasses the government. Otherwise, if things are just kept quiet under the carpet, they just go about their business. Think about these big companies that we're surrounded by. Tobacco companies, alcohol companies, gambling enterprises, weapons manufacturers. They have huge lobbying powers, and more or less there's no ethical requirements put on them. It's only when you may be not aware, but like for example, there's a big casino in Sydney, there's another one in Melbourne, and this casino was caught out helping to launder money on behalf of criminals. The criminals could go there, spend a whole bunch on their gambling, and get sort of clean money back in change, so to speak. Or if you think of the tobacco companies, that went on. Nowadays it's they've been shut down a lot. But like for so many, actually even now, it's illegal for you to go and buy, not that you'd be very interested, to buy tobacco that's not authorised, because the government's not getting a cut on that. So, same with liquor. Everybody knows that it's poisonous, that it's a carcinogen, but every single sports event is surrounded by liquor advertising. So why is it allowed? Because the government's getting money from it, because the liquor companies are so powerful. Even, like for example, a few years ago, one of the political parties tried to limit the gambling that was going on in all the sort of clubs in New South Wales. Like, people can go in there and on those machines, the guy can lose his entire paycheck in about 20 minutes because there's no limit on what you can bet even, apparently. So when they tried to limit, like they were trying to make the bets could be smaller and stuff like that, there was the different clubs, they had so much political influence, they launched an advertising campaign that had more money behind it than the government's campaign to become re-elected. So it's, you don't tackle these people lightly. Compared to the power of these companies, people who like to blow the whistle, whistleblowers, have very little protection. There's another example. A few years ago, there were negotiations going on between Australia and a little country to our north called East Timor over some gas fields, how much each party would get from the deal. And the Australian government was caught out illegally tapping the discussions of the East Timorese. We were illegally listening over what their plans were. So the people that actually blew the whistle on this and made it public for so many years have been relentlessly pursued by the government because these people embarrassed them. Not the fact that what they said was true and that what we were doing is illegal, but that the fact that these people embarrassed the government, so the government spends unlimited money to pursue them. Or another example, the Australian government tried to require that Facebook had fact-checking, so that if there was an election on, for example, or something important, that there couldn't be stuff just posted on Facebook that had no reality, no truthfulness to it, that people couldn't just post any old thing. So therefore Facebook had to employ people to do fact-checking. But just recently, the guy who's in charge, that Zuckerberg, he's disbanded his entire fact-checking departments. There is none now. I mean, why should he waste his money making sure that what you are being fed is true? So more or less, there's no social contract between these very powerful moneyed interests and the community that they're supposed to be serving. The only aim of it is to make money. In an earlier verse, Prabhupada in a purport talks of a different model for society. He talks of an Aryan society. He quotes the word Arya as meaning those who are advancing. And I was thinking, everybody sitting here, all of you devotees, fit into that category of those who are advancing. All of you are performing sadhana. You are practicing spiritual practices, and therefore you are advancing. We all know that verse, Om Agnatimarandasya Ginanjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tajmai Shri Gurave Namaha. That verse is like, offer my respectful obeisances to my spiritual master, who with the torchlight of knowledge has opened my eyes, which were blinded by the darkness of ignorance. So this describes all of us. We are all born into ignorance. The very process of being born means you start off in ignorance. We have very little consciousness at that stage of life, and then hopefully, as life goes on, we advance. But for most people, they only advance in material qualifications. There's still no spiritual understanding of who in fact you are. Prabhupada says that human society, actually I want to go back a tiny bit, we all start off in ignorance, as I said. In a few cases the Bhagavatam talks of a few very special cases like Prahlad Maharaj, who didn't start off in complete ignorance because he had heard Narad Muni preaching to his mum while he was still in the womb. But for all of us, we start off pretty much in abysmal ignorance, isn't it? I know I did. Haven't advanced a whole lot. So Prabhupada says human society should have movement. It should have movement built into it. Not just the tens of thousands of flights that are taking off from one country to another. I Googled it. Apparently, on any day, there's about 100,000 flights taking off from one place and landing in another. 100,000. So they're going from here to there. At any one moment, right now, there's about at least 12,000 flights in the air, apparently. That's inconceivable. So much movement going on like that. But there's no movement going on like that. So, what does this advancement of consciousness look like? There's this beautiful verse in the preface to the Bhagavad Gita where Prabhupada says, a living entity is happily the part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. And thus the natural function is to render immediate service to the Lord. That part and parcel. Part means we're only small, we're not the complete thing. And parcel means that we are integral. Like when you talk of the Supreme Lord, you also talk of the living entities. We are part and parcel. But unlike some philosophies, we are not the complete whole. It's almost ludicrous to think that we could be God. So when we are consciousness of this relationship, we act accordingly in our happy, blissful state. But when we are forgetful of this relationship, then we are lost. And then we feel that emptiness or the loneliness that so many people outside are feeling. And we need a regular process to keep that relationship alive, which is our sadhana. It's described that even Patanjali describes, even doing asanas, there has to be this regularity. It's described that if our sadhana stops, it's a little like the cleaning. We all know when we're cleaning the house. If you don't clean for a week, what happens? Everything's covered in dust. So the same thing, if we stop our sadhana, gradually the dust starts to settle again. I've got a whole lot of stuff here, but we don't have another quarter of an hour. It's just about 8:30. I'm going to jump to the end. I was thinking when we first met other devotees, when we first became part of a community of devotees, you suddenly realize how different all the other devotees are, in the sense that we come from such different walks of life. Like materially, you wouldn't hang around with different people like that. Materially, isn't it? You seek out people that have the same sort of modes of nature as you, the same habits, the same interests. But spiritually, we have people from all different walks of life here. But still, like actually Prabhupada mentions, we all share a common Father, the Supreme Lord. So we're all children of that one Father, all living entities. When I often talk with visitors coming here, and they say that the thing they can feel here when they come here that they don't feel outside is that there is this common centre. We have some sort of unitedness. We all share that common centre of Krishna. Prabhupada used to criticise the United Nations. It's a nice ambition, yeah, to be united, but artificially you can't do it. Like he used to say, every year I look at the United Nations, there's more flags. So it means less unitedness. But just to give us a little enthusiasm, if we stick to this process of sadhana, so Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, he says, before giving up this body, if you're able to tolerate the urges of the material senses and check the force of desire and anger, that person is a yogi and you can be happy in this world. That meeting between Kadama and Manu, what they're actually communicating together wasn't just words, it was beyond words. Because of their advanced consciousness, they're expressing love to one another, affection. To practice bhakti, we have to have certain qualities. Obviously, these two individuals have those qualities. Once we stop identifying with those temporary material demands of the body, there's a whole new experience of different sorts of relationships opens up to us. Thank you so much, Prabhu. Hare Krishna. I think I've conveniently got to the point where there's no time for questions. Anyone has a really quick one or a comment they'd like to make? Thank you for finding my glasses for me. Yes, pardon me. Physically.
But I've seen that differently with you. I was fortunate enough to be at your house for a couple of weeks, and I see you working on your paintings of Krishna. Krishna was appearing physically before you.
Yeah.
Very beautiful painting.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. It was a lovely class.
Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada.